The wind came down from the north, like a file against bone, rasping every eave and hitch rail and pale rock. Soot-gray dusk leaned over the copper-finch saloon when the back door thudded once against its jamb. Quick as a heartbeat, nobody heard. Laughter from the card tables drowned most things this time of evening. Jonas Pike was busy wiping a glass till it squealed like a trapped mouse. The second knock dragged, wet as a boot in mud. Jonas frowned, set the glass down, and swung the door wide. A gust shouldered in first, smelling of iron rain and horse sweat. Then came the shape. A woman sagged against the frame, shawl black with trail dust, face bloodless as chalk. Her right arm hung stiff, but her left clamped hard to a bundled infant whose breath wreathed the cold air in tiny clouds. Pinned under her palm lay a slug flattened, dull ugly and a scrap of paper curled and blood-freckled. Jonas bent and read the mark even before the script. Clay Harlan's cattle brand stamped at the top of a gambling chit. A bad omen in good ink. The bundle was swaddled in ivory lace, gone ragged at the edges, a pattern any church seamstress could. Name for what it was. Wedding cloth, ma'am.
Ow.
Jonas rasped. She lifted her head, eyes fever bright. Lips cracked and bloodied at one corner. Her breath whistled shallow. Water, she whispered. A beat later, softer still. Coffee. If it's hot. Jonas hollered for Sam to run for Doc Linney, though his gut said the woman wouldn't tolerate much prodding, and he was right. By the time Linney came clattering in with his black bag, she was sitting upright by the stove, shoulder bare and gleaming with whiskey she'd poured herself. "Don't lay a hand on me," she warned, voice worn thin but iron-edged. "Just tell me which way to the Bell place." Linney blinked. Jonas swore under his breath. "That spread's been near vacant since I know how long," she cut in. "Still stands, doesn't it?" Words seeped quick through the floorboards to the barroom. Faces pressed door cracks. Whispers curling like smoke. She's back. 2 winters gone since her man got trampled under a Harlan drive and she'd quit Pale Rock like a bad dream. Folks muttered old things, Cheyenne raids, debts unpaid, a woman too proud by half. She asked no favors but 2, a blanket for the baby and a ride come dawn. Jonas hitched his wagon because his conscience had teeth, because something in her eyes said she'd drag that infant on foot if he refused. Night thickened. Outside, wind sawed at the shutters. Inside, lamplight glazed her profile where she sat rigid by the stove, bundle tucked like a last scrap of mercy. Once, the shawl slipped. Jonas glimpsed the crease along her shoulder bullet furrow, clean through meat, but not bone. Whoever fired hadn't aimed to scare. She dozed a little. Near dawn, coffee cup cooling in her grip. The baby's breath puffed steady against the hollow of her throat. Lace wrap stained in a pattern Jonas couldn't stop staring at. A bridal promise torn and bloodied. Carrying life instead of vows. When morning dragged its pale belly over the flats, Jonas hitched the team. She climbed the wagon without help, jaw set against the ache that made her sway once quick. He tucked a quilt over her knees, but she thanked him only with a nod. Her gaze fixed where the horizon burned thin as ice. The Bell homestead waited 30 miles east, past cottonwoods etched black against snow like ink strokes on bone. Folks said it stood empty but for wind and memory a porch with a rocking chair that never learned his rider died. She'd left that place cursing fate and men and God. Now she rode back with a baby. It wasn't hers, and blood stiffening in her sleeve. To face a house stripped of stock, of warmth, of everything but the echo of vows that turned to dust. The road bucked under the wagon wheels. Jonas wanted to speak but knew better. Some silences are granted you can pound till your fists bleed and not chip a flake. So he drove, and the wind drove with him, hissing along the frozen draws, bearing questions that would outlast the day. By noon, the roofs of Pale Rock had vanished behind gray veils of snow. Ahead lay the Bell Place timbers sunk in drifts. Smokehouse door ajar like a slack jaw, the rocking chair moving slow and a porch wind that remembered things better forgotten. The land watched her come, and it did not smile. Snow sifted fine as sifted flour across the flats, whispering against the wagon bed when Jonas reined in at the Bell Place. The cabin hunched on the rise, its roof hatted white, porch sagging as though it bore the weight of every silence since. She left. Nora climbed down without waiting for his hand. The wind tried to shoulder her back toward Pale Rock. But pride is a mule. You can't turn it once it sets. Inside, the air was brittle, with cold and emptiness. Shadows lay in the corners like feral dogs. She shut the door, slid the latch, and stood still long enough to hear the house breathe. Timber creak, wind seeping through chinks like a slow leak of sorrow. On the hearth, his rifle lay mounted high, stock split where the stampede snapped it the day he died. She'd polished that barrel even after the break. A ritual clung too long after use had gone. She laid the baby on the bedstead. Quilt faded to the color of dishwater and stripped her shawl. The wound in her shoulder pulsed ugly, slicking the cloth with dark bloom. She fetched the lye soap, the whiskey bottle with 2 fingers left in it, scrubbed till fire licked her nerves raw. The taste of copper rose in her mouth, though she wasn't bleeding there. When the pain peaked, the baby wailed, a thin, desperate cry that pinned her to the room like a nail. She pressed rags till the seep slowed, wrapped it tight, and rocked on her heels, listening to that cry braid into the wind's low moan. Eyes fell to the floorboard's boot scuffs near the threshold where he used to stamp snow, a bridle hook by the door hanging empty like an unanswered question. She traced them with her gaze and felt the years she'd tried to burn slide back. Over her like old skin, flashbacks came sharp as glass edges, his hands combing her braid before Sunday meeting. The two of them hammering the last nail in the corral gate. The sweet, stupid laugh when he spoke of buying a white horse someday, as if color could bless a beast. Then the stampede black tide over brittle grass, men hollering, clay harlands, riders driving them hard for coin. The town said Indians spooked the herd. Nora knew better. Greed was a sharper spur than fear. Horses don't know tribes, only noise and hunger and the whip. When they buried him, she cut her braids by lantern light, burned the wedding linens out back. Let the smoke write her vows to nothingness. She swore the Bell place would rot before she set foot in it again. And yet here she was, shawl heavy with another woman's child, blood stiff in her sleeve, staring at the rifle like it might still guard her from everything she'd lost. She reached for the baby, drawn by a sound that wasn't quite crying anymore, more like breathing with questions in it. The blanket had slipped. Lace glimmered there, ivory turned gray by road filth, but patterned with a stitch her fingers remembered. That scrap could have come from the linens she burned same. Looped roses, same promise, twisted into thread. Cruel echo or a sign? Her throat clenched around a word she didn't speak. The chit weighed her pocket like a stone, Harlan's mark. Bold as a brand on a man's skin. Debt, maybe blood price, maybe hush money for a wrong too big to name. Did the child belong to a saloon girl who'd crossed him, or a rider's wife whose tongue he'd stilled? She could hand it over to the mission wagon when it rattled through next week. Safe, fed, forgotten. That would be clean. But dawn came bleeding pale through the east window, and she didn't move. She wrapped the baby closer, shawl closing like a secret, and stepped onto the porch. Frost webbed the rails. Brittle lace the wind would shred by noon. She lowered herself into the rocker, the same that once held nights thick with talk and tobacco and plans that turned to dust. Its slow creak rose in the hush, a sound almost tender. She held the child so tight its breath warmed her collarbone, and for a while she let the rhythm steady her pulse. Snow sifted on, soft and ceaseless, covering tracks, softening edges. But inside her, something sharper than grief stirred the shape of a vow, maybe not spoken but felt, heavy as iron and bright as frost in the first lean sun. The wind sharpened to knives by mid-morning, driving snow like salt across the flats. Nora hitched her shawl tight and saddled the mare anyway. Wood was running low, and the dross would seal by nightfall if the drifts kept their hunger.
Mercy?
Slept in a shawl nest by the hearth. She checked twice before stepping out, rifle slung though her shoulders still ached like old shame. The sky had the color of pewter hammered thin, horizon erased by the white breath of the storm rising out of the east. She rode bent to the gust, following the line of cottonwoods toward her woodlot where the axe still leaned from yesterday's labor. But the ground spoke louder than the wind if you knew how to listen. Boot prints in the skim of snow, long stride, overlaid by softer sign moccasin, toe angled inward. Not sneaking, coming and going deliberate as a prayer. Her fingers brushed the rifle stock, though it gaped like a broken jaw. She cut her wood fast, heart ticking time against the gale, and lashed the load behind her. By the time the cabin crouched, back into view through the blur, a shape stood waiting by the barn, horse steaming, hide dark with melt. The rider turned slow when she drew near, lifting his hand palm out. His coat swallowed him to the knees, buffalo hide stitched with beadwork, faded, half unpicked like a story someone tried to erase. "Your goats were straying," he said, voice low as river gravel. "Stacked your wood. Set coffee near the hearth." He tipped his chin toward the stovepipe where smoke now climbed straight into the whitening sky. "Storm coming. Best you feed the fire." Cheyenne vowels bent his English soft, round as creek stones. Nora swung down, blood quick in her temples. She should have told him to leave. The land between them had been tilled by old grief and fresh suspicion. Instead, she nodded once, because frost was already webbing his lashes, and the cold cared nothing for pride. Afternoon fell blind with lightning snow, wind keening against the shutters till the house trembled like a thing afraid. But inside, the air thickened with stove heat and cedar scent. He crouched near the door, close enough to guard, far enough to mean no claim. When Mercy whimpered, he hummed out a tune for dancing, but something older, threaded with patience, a song that once kept children still while braids were woven for ceremony. Between gusts, the world shrank to lamplight and shadow. Nora set her shoulder against the wall, pulse easing though the storm had teeth. Eliasee gave the name like laying down a card he didn't mind, losing fetched the broken rifle from its hooks, turned it in his hands as if measuring old grief against his own scars. Without asking, he bound the split stock with rawhide strips cut from his gear, pegging it tight with pins he shaped from the leg of a busted plow she'd left on the porch. An old tool lending its bones to another. She brewed coffee strong enough. To bite, he drank, crouched where the light barely touched him, steam curling like breath off winter earth. "Found a chit in the road," she said, voice flat as the snow-choked plain. Harlan's mark on it. His jaw worked slow, like a man grinding stone to sand. "Cards," he said.
"Act writers threw half their wages on a table last week."
"Icked," one bragged loud, said he'd unburdened himself of trouble at the Finch. His glance brushed the bundles sleeping by the stove. For a moment the storm seemed to lean harder on the roof. Outside, wolves laced their hunger to the wind. Inside, silence thickened, but didn't choke. There was danger in it, and something like trust, quiet as a seed under snow. When dawn peeled the sky from the earth, drifts had carved the land into a map she didn't know. The storm had wiped tracks clean, left only whiteness trembling under sun like beaten tin. Nora opened the door and breathed air sharp enough to slice. Behind her, the rocker stirred faintly in the draft, as if the house remembered every man who'd sat watch through long nights. But when she listened past the wind, it wasn't only her husband's ghost filling the room. Another heartbeat moved there now steady, unclaimed, watchful as the ridge beyond the flats. Snow held the land like a clenched fist for 6 straight days. The wind's voice dulled to a low drone, but its teeth still showed in the drifts piled against the porch rail. Inside, the stove worked like a mule under whip, yet the air clung. Damp from boots steaming near the hearth and snow melt, bleeding through the roof, seam above the loft ladder. Elias took the loft, leaving only the sound of hymnboards creaking. Breath steady as proof, he stayed. He came down at first light to split kindling, vanish to the barn, return with his coat rimed white, then climb again without fuss. But his presence sat in the room like an unstrung wire, humming low even when he spoke nothing. Nora tested him the 3rd morning, sliding a frayed lead rope across the table. "Could use a braid, if your hands know the work." He took it without blink, fingers moving like water over stone, 3 strands folding neat as river reeds. better than she could have done herself. She rebraided her hair that night by lantern glow, clumsy from neglect, rawhide thong cinching the end. No ribbon. This was not ceremony, only a way to keep it from falling in the dishwater. Yet her fingers remembered the old ritual the way a husband once undid the plate slow as prayer, and that memory burned like stove heat under skin. On the fourth day, word came skidding on the belly of a boy's pony, breath smoking like a freight train. A note folded in oil paper, ink blotted hard. Harlan claims you harbor stolen stock, child. Bring it to Pale Rock or the law will come fetch. She read it twice, hands numb, though the fire licked bright. Stolen stock, he called it, not flesh, not breath. A brand stamped on a chit was heavier than a heartbeat in a man like Harlan's world. Elias said nothing at first, just stood with his back to the stove, shadows carving his face to iron. When he spoke, it was quiet as snow falling. Law bends where money leans. You know this. I'll speak for her, Nora shot back. Court can't deny a woman tending her own roof. His eyes met hers then, dark as creek ice. They will. They count cattle cleaner than people. This one he let the sentence die in the hiss of sap popping in the fire. Then, those riders cut poles from a Cheyenne camp 2 weeks past. Took rifles. Claimed it was for registration. They burned the meat poles after. Said it was an accident. The words struck like cold water. She swallowed hard. You think her blood runs red on both sides? I think they threw her away to keep ledger lines straight. His jaw tightened. And I've seen what comes when men tidy their books with blood. Argument flared, then guttered, a lamp wick smoking low. She reached for Law like a drowning soul grabs driftwood. He swore by witness and action because he had seen Law drive wagons over graves. Mercy stirred in her crib, coughing till her tiny body shook. That sound ended the talk sharper than any word. Night fell thick, leaking through seams and long silver knives of cold. They sealed the roof, drip with rags, shared coffee grounds, sifted and dried for a second brew, rocked the baby through fever, until their shoulders brushed by accident, then did not move apart too quick. The mended rifle lay across their knees at times, oil warming under their thumbs as they worked the stock smooth. Her husband's ghost hovered in the grain of that wood. Yet another presence pressed close now, a man who spoke little, whose silence felt less like emptiness than a wall built to keep something tender safe. By the sixth dawn, frost jeweled the rafters, and Mercy slept easy for the first time. Nora stood at the hearth, braiding a strip of torn sheet into a cord, her hair tumbling unbound down her spine like thaw water over stone. Elias watched from the ladder's shadow, hands slack at his sides. For a breath, the hush held them the storm outside. The one between them, both near spent. Family, she thought, might not begin with love. It might start as a shield raised against a common threat. Two strangers braced under one roof, vowing nothing but survival. Yet as she tied the braid and looped it over a nail, she felt the truth flicker. A pact can grow roots if the ground is watered with enough quiet, enough shared hunger, enough nights where a man hums a child to sleep and never once asks whose name it bears. The thaw came sudden as a gasped Chinook wind rolling off the peaks, softening the drifts to slush, prying loose the ice nails that had pinned winter tight. By noon the yard was a quilt of mud and frost shards, the air carrying a raw tang of sap and horse sweat. Nora stood on the porch rail in her husband's old coat, the mended rifle resting easy in her hands, though her pulse did not match the calm she wore. They rode in 4 across hooves, slinging muck. Harlan in the lead hat, low, mouth set like a blade. His men fanned wide, the way wolves test a fence before they leap it. When they reined up, their spurs sang against stirrup irons a bright old music. Afternoon, Harlan said, as if the word were a tax. You've got property that bears my brand. His gaze slid to the bundle swaying in the crook of Nora's arm. Best you hand it over before this turns sour. She met his eyes without flinch. Child ain't a steer, Clay. Behind her, a sound low, measured threaded from the barn shadows. Elias walked into the gray light, coat unbuttoned to show no weapon drawn, though his hands were busy. A length of bowline coiled in one, a branding iron in the other. Its face black with old scorch, yet the mark, clear Harlan's mark. "Found this," Elias said, voice like frost cracking. "Half buried near the Finch back door the night she came. Someone meant to write claim after the fact." Harlan's jaw bunched. "You keep out, breed scout." The words hit like spittle. Nora saw Elias take them without blink, though the muscles in his neck flexed like rope under strain. One of Harlan's riders twitched then, hand darting for the shawl-wrapped weight against Nora's chest. He never reached. The iron came down in a hiss of air, catching his forearm with a sound like wet wood splitting. The man buckled sideways, howling. Gunfire flared, one shot then two, tearing the edge off silence. A lantern toppled in the scramble, oil licking across the porch boards. Flame leaped wild, bright as brass, wind feeding it like a drunkard's thirst. Neighbors had gathered at the road by then. Jonas Pike among them, coat flapping open over the Colt in his fist. Voices rose, steel rasped from scabbards. Under the sudden roar of fire came another sound bucket slosh, feet pounding mud. Two Cheyenne women from the river camp stepped forward wordless, skirts snapping like flags as they joined the line. Water arced in glinting ropes, hissed to steam. Smoke clawed the rafters, seared their eyes raw. Elias fought shoulder to shoulder with men who an hour ago would not have touched his hand. His face was a mask of sweat and cinder, hair sparking with ember dust. Nora worked till her palms flayed, baby strapped tight to her breast beneath her coat, breath coming in sobs that scalded her throat raw. When the last flame sagged to glow, the porch was black bone, the rocker a ghost-shaped charred but standing yet. The roof smoked like a pipe, tamped hard. Harlan sat his horse amid the hush, ledger lies smoldering behind his eyes, townsfolk circling like a noose of witness. Jonas spoke plain. "Ledger shows you paid a wet nurse, Clay. Ain't no steer in that." Harlan swallowed ash. "This ain't done." Then he hauled his reins and wheeled into the dusk, his men trailing like dogs with tails broke. Night slid down soft as soot. The bucket line broke to murmurs, boots crunching off toward lantern lights bobbing home.
Ow.
The river women vanished. Like breath in wind, silence settled under the moon, pale as bone through smoke veils. Elias sat on the porch edge. Mercy cradled in the crook of his arm. His hands were black with soot, but they cupped her head as if carved for the task. Nora lowered beside him. The heat of him soaking through her torn sleeve, the smell of char and sweat threading the air between them. Her fingers found his, slow, deliberate, did not leave. From her pocket she drew the scrap of lace sillowed, stubborn as a scaran passed it to him without word. He braided it through the dark fuzz of Mercy's hair with a tenderness that stopped her breath. No ribbon, no altar. It's just the three of them in ember glow. A silence that wasn't fear anymore but a hearth fire banked deep, ready to burn clean come morning. Above the ruin the ash moon rode high, and the wind carried the scent of something ended and something begun. The thaw had eaten the road's two ruts, puddles flashing bronze under a sky scraped clean by wind. The wagon wheels sang in muck as Nora guided the team east toward Red Willow Crossing, Mercy swaddled in her lap. Elias rode ahead, his shadow a long spear on the slush. Spring smelled like rust and riverweed, the air wet with promise and old sorrow. Where the flats dipped toward timberline, they veered to the Cheyenne camp. Smoke curled from low lodges patched in buffalo hide, the thaw's breath steaming from stacked poles stripped bare by Harlan's men. Elders met them in the hush before. Evening drums. A woman with hawk-gray braids stepped forward, beads at her throat catching the last shards of sun. She lifted Mercy without asking, pressing her face to the child's hair. Her words came slow, braided through Elias's tongue. An English sister's daughter, blood keeps its own. They told the story plain. A ranch hand Harlan's own blood took what he fancied, left shame in his boot tracks. The mother died birthing winter week. Harlan tried to scrub the ledger clean with ink and lies. The aunt laid a beaded tie across Mercy's chest, then turned to Nora, fingers deft as river grass, and wove Nora's hair into a single braid. ceremony stitched without altar or word. The crossing bustled with wagons and riders when court convened. Inside the plank-built post, the judge listened under a slow whirring fan, his eyes river-flat, his pen scratching like a locust. Ledger pages spoke first, inked with falsity. The branding iron its, jaw burned black, told the rest. Witness tongues Jonas Pike. 2 women from the camp sealed the weave. Harlan sat stiff, jaw working against words that would not come. When the gavel fell, it sounded less like thunder than like a gate latch clicking home. The decree cut clean. Nora Bell, guardian-in-law. Cheyenne kinship rights upheld. Rifles to be returned. Harlan fined for fraud and seizure. Rang only the gravity of something heavy set down at last. They left in silence, broken only by the cry of meadowlarks threading the dusk. Mud gleamed copper where the trail bent toward the hills. Elias rode flank now, not point. The mended rifle across his saddle as if the weight meant something agreed. "Bell Place need another pair of hands?" he asked, eyes on the horizon. Nora did not answer with speech. She drew the sling higher. Across her breast soft hide lined with lace, once bloodied, now pale as bone, and laid her palm on the rifle's stock before passing it to him. His fingers closed over it, slow, sure, like a man taking an oath to the earth itself. Mercy slept between them, breath feathering the chill, her dark fuzz twined with a single thread of beads. Ahead, home rose out of smoke-blue shadow. Porch. Rebuilt, rocker mended, though its scars still showed, ready to creak beneath stars. The last light fell like hammered brass across the land, and for the first time since winter's bite, Nora felt the weight in her chest ease, not vanish, but shift, like ice breaking on a river, to let the water run free.